The funeral reception was winding down when Uncle Richard cornered me by the flower arrangements. Dad had been buried 3 hours earlier, and the house was still full of relatives picking at casseroles and speaking in hushed tones about what a good man he'd been. "Natalie," Uncle Richard said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder with what anyone else might have mistaken for comfort. "We need to talk." I looked up at him, this man who had been Dad's business partner for 22 years but had never quite managed to hide his resentment that Dad owned 60% of Mitchell & Associates while Richard only owned 40%. "What about, Uncle Richard?" "About the future. About the business." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "I want you to know that your father's share of the company will be staying in the family, but not with you." I felt my stomach drop, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean your father left his share to my boys, to Kevin and Tyler. They've been working at the firm for 3 years now. They understand the business." Kevin and Tyler, my cousins who had joined Mitchell & Associates straight out of college with business degrees and attitudes that suggested they'd inherited the company already. They spent more time planning happy hour than planning client strategies, but Uncle Richard had always treated them like the second coming of Warren Buffett. "You get nothing," Uncle Richard continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The business is ours now. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but your father was realistic about your limitations." "My limitations?" "The fact that I dropped out of business school 8 years ago to pursue what Dad had called my art projects. The fact that I'd never shown interest in joining the family accounting firm. The fact that I lived in a small apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and worked what they thought was a part-time job at a nonprofit." "I understand," I said quietly. Uncle Richard's expression softened slightly, probably mistaking my calm response for acceptance. "Look, Natalie, I know this is hard. But Kevin and Tyler have MBAs. They understand corporate finance. Well, you're creative, but that's not what the business needs." I nodded, watching as Kevin and Tyler stood near the kitchen, already talking animatedly with some of Dad's former clients. Already acting like the owners they apparently believed they were about to become. "The funeral was beautiful," Uncle Richard continued, apparently feeling magnanimous now that he thought he'd secured his victory. "Your father would have been proud." "Thank you. And Natalie, don't worry about your future. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe we can find you a small position at the firm. Reception work, filing, something like that." Reception work. Filing. For the daughter of the man who had built Mitchell & Associates from a 2-person operation into a firm that managed over $200 million in client assets. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom where I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls from my assistant Marina and a text that read, "The Singapore deal closed. $12.3 million. Congratulations, boss." I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about the conversation I just had with Uncle Richard. He had no idea that his creative niece with limitations had spent the past 5 years building a digital marketing empire that generated more revenue in a single quarter than Mitchell & Associates made in an entire year. Dad had known, of course. He'd been quietly proud of my success, even if he'd never fully understood how I'd built a $67 million company from what he called computer stuff. But we'd agreed to keep it quiet from the rest of the family. Dad had said it was because he didn't want Richard to feel diminished, but I think the real reason was that he knew Richard would find some way to make my success about himself. "You're doing something incredible, Nat," Dad had told me 6 months before his heart attack. "But you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Build your empire quietly and let your work speak for itself." Now Dad was gone and Uncle Richard was already dividing up what he thought was the spoils. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the reception, where Uncle Richard was holding court near the mantel, telling anyone who would listen about his plans for transitioning the business to the next generation. "Kevin has some innovative ideas about digital client outreach," he was saying. "And Tyler is brilliant with investment strategies. It's going to be exciting to see where they take the firm." Kevin, who was 25 and had never managed anything more complex than his own Instagram account, nodded sagely. Tyler, 23 and fresh out of business school, was already talking about disrupting the accounting space. I found Mom in the kitchen mechanically wrapping leftover food. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "I keep expecting him to walk through that door and ask if there's any more of Mrs. Henderson's potato salad," she said, tears starting to form again. "I can't believe he's really gone." Mom, did Dad ever talk to you about his will? She looked up from the casserole dish she was covering with foil. A little bit. Why? Uncle Richard seems to think he knows what Dad left to whom. Mom frowned. Richard has been making a lot of assumptions since your father passed. But the lawyer will sort everything out tomorrow. Tomorrow. Mr. Patterson called this morning. He wants to meet with the family at 2 p.m. to read the will. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. What if Uncle Richard was right? What if Dad really had left his share of the business to Kevin and Tyler? Dad had always been traditional in some ways, and maybe he'd decided that business degrees trumped actual business success. The next day we gathered in the conference room at Patterson, Hughes & Associates. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table like he was already running things. Kevin and Tyler flanked him, both wearing new suits and expressions of poorly concealed excitement. Mom sat beside me, clutching a tissue and looking lost. Mr. Patterson, Dad's lawyer for over 15 years, entered with a thick manila folder and an expression that gave nothing away. "Thank you all for coming," he said, settling into his chair. "I know this is a difficult time, but Robert was very specific about his wishes." Uncle Richard leaned forward. "We appreciate you handling this so efficiently, Bill. The sooner we can transition the business operations, the better for everyone." Mr. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Let's start with the will, shall we?" He opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked surprisingly thick. "The last will and testament of Robert James Mitchell," he began. "Written on March 15th of this year and properly witnessed and notarized." March 15th. That was only 4 months ago, just 2 months before Dad's heart attack. "To my brother Richard," Mr. Patterson continued, "I leave my collection of vintage fishing equipment and my 1987 Ford pickup truck, both of which hold sentimental value from our childhood." Uncle Richard's confident expression flickered slightly. "To my nephews Kevin and Tyler, I leave $25,000 each to assist with any student loans or personal debts they may have." Kevin and Tyler exchanged glances. $25,000 was nice, but it wasn't exactly inheriting a multimillion-dollar business. "To my beloved wife Margaret, I leave the house, all personal effects and $500,000 from my life insurance policy." Mom started crying softly. I took her hand. "And regarding my 60% ownership stake in Mitchell & Associates," Mr. Patterson continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. Uncle Richard sat up straighter, clearly expecting this to be the moment his sons inherited the business. "I leave my entire 60% ownership stake along with all voting rights and operational control to my daughter Natalie Claire Mitchell." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming. Uncle Richard's face went white. "That's impossible." Mr. Patterson looked at him calmly. "I assure you it's not only possible, it's exactly what Robert wanted. But Natalie doesn't know anything about running a business." "Actually," Mr. Patterson said, pulling another document from his folder, "Robert was quite proud of Natalie's business acumen. He asked me to include a letter explaining his decision. He handed me an envelope with Dad's handwriting, 'For my brilliant daughter.' I opened it with shaking hands and read aloud, 'Natalie, by the time you read this I'll be gone and Richard will probably be very upset. I'm leaving you the business not because you need it, but because you're the only person I trust to do right by it. I know about Aurora Digital. I know about the $67 million in revenue, the 200 employees, the Fortune 500 clients. I know you built all of that while letting the family think you were just doing computer stuff part-time. I'm proud of you for building your own empire, but I'm even more proud that you did it quietly without needing anyone's approval or recognition. That's the kind of character that should run Mitchell & Associates. Richard thinks business is about MBAs and golf games and impressing clients with expensive dinners. You know, it's about actually serving people and solving their problems. The firm needs that perspective. Do whatever you think is best with the business. Sell it, keep it, transform it. I trust your judgment completely. You've already proven you can build something from nothing. Now you get to decide what to do with something that already exists. Your loving father, who was always more proud of you than you knew." I finished reading and looked around the table. Uncle Richard looked like he might be sick. Kevin and Tyler were staring at me like I'd grown a second head. $67 million? Uncle Richard whispered. "Aurora Digital," I said simply. "It's a digital marketing company." We work with Fortune 500 clients to develop comprehensive online strategies. You own a company worth $67 million? We generated $67 million in revenue last year. The company is worth significantly more than that. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. There's more to the will. Robert also established a scholarship fund with $100,000 for students pursuing business degrees, to be administered by Natalie. And, he continued, he left specific instructions about the transition of Mitchell and Associates. He wanted Natalie to have full autonomy to make whatever changes she feels are necessary. Uncle Richard found his voice again. Natalie, this is absurd. You can't just take over a business you know nothing about. Uncle Richard, I've been studying Mitchell and Associates financials for the past 2 years. What? Dad asked me to review the books as a favor. He wanted an outside perspective on the firm's digital strategy and operational efficiency. This was true. Dad had been worried about the firm's slow growth and had quietly asked me to analyze their business model. My recommendations had helped increase their client retention rate by 23% over the past 18 months, though Richard had never known where the suggestions were coming from. In fact, I continued, I have some thoughts about how we might improve operations. Tyler spoke up for the first time. Well, that depends on whether you want to stay with the firm or pursue other opportunities. Kevin leaned forward. What kind of changes are you talking about? I looked around the table at these people who had spent years dismissing me as the family underachiever, who had planned to exclude me entirely from Dad's business legacy. I'm thinking of expanding into comprehensive financial planning and digital asset management, modernizing our client communication systems, potentially opening a second location focused on serving small business clients. Uncle Richard was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Natalie, where would you even get the capital for that kind of expansion? Uncle Richard, I could buy Mitchell and Associates outright and still have enough left over to fund the expansion from my personal assets. The room went quiet again. But I don't want to buy it, I continued. I want to earn my place in it. I want to prove that Dad's faith in me was justified. Mr. Patterson smiled. There's one more thing. Robert left a sealed envelope with specific instructions for Natalie's first month as owner. He handed me another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting. Nat, Richard is going to fight you on every decision for the first few weeks. Don't take it personally. He's scared and proud and doesn't understand how you could be successful without his help. Be patient with him, but don't let him push you around. You're the boss now. Also, Kevin has potential but needs guidance. Tyler is lazy but smart. Give them both a chance to prove themselves under your leadership before you make any major personnel decisions. I love you, Dad. I looked up at Uncle Richard, who was still processing everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes. Uncle Richard, I said gently, I know this isn't what you expected, but I'd like you to stay on as senior partner. The firm needs your experience and your client relationships. You want me to stay? I want us to work together. Dad built something good here and I think we can make it even better. What about Kevin and Tyler? I looked at my cousins who were still trying to process the fact that their useless cousin was now their boss. Kevin, I'd like you to head up our new small business division. Tyler, I want you to work with me on developing our digital asset management services. Kevin blinked. You're offering us promotions? I'm offering you opportunities. What you do with them is up to you. Over the next several hours we talked through the transition plan. By the time we left the lawyer's office, Uncle Richard had gone from hostile to curious to cautiously optimistic. Natalie, he said as we walked to our cars, I owe you an apology. For what? For underestimating you. For assuming that your success was somehow less valid because it wasn't traditional. Uncle Richard, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I spent years thinking you were wasting your potential when you were actually exceeding mine. 6 months later, Mitchell and Associates had grown by 40%. Our new digital services division was booked solid, and our small business client base had tripled. Kevin had turned out to be excellent at building relationships with entrepreneur clients, and Tyler had developed an innovative app for real-time financial tracking. Uncle Richard and I had coffee every Friday morning to discuss strategy and operations. During one of these meetings, he looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Your father would be proud, he said. I hope so. I know so. Not just because of the business success but because of how you handled everything. You could have fired me and the boys after how we treated you at the funeral. Dad's letter said to give everyone a chance to prove themselves. And if we hadn't? I smiled. Then I would have wished you well and helped you find other opportunities. Uncle Richard laughed. I always thought business was about beating the competition and maximizing profit. What do you think it's about now? Building something that serves people and lasts beyond you. As I sat in Dad's old office, now my office, looking out at the team of accountants and financial planners working to help our clients achieve their dreams, I realized that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or even businesses. It's the trust that someone places in your judgment, and the responsibility that comes with living up to that trust. Dad had known I didn't need his business to be successful. But he'd also known that his business needed someone who understood what success really meant. The will had surprised everyone except the person who mattered most. The man who'd written it, confident that his daughter would know exactly what to do with his legacy.
My name is Alexandra Chen, and at 32, I shattered expectations to become the youngest vice president of operations at Johnson Corp. Every time I swiped my keycard for access to the executive floor, I felt a surge of pride. That pride kept me grounded, until my carefully constructed world started unraveling. All thanks to my mother-in-law Helen and her whirlwind romance with our 60-year-old CEO. Another stellar quarter, Alex, Tom Johnson had said 3 months ago during my last performance review. His tone had been warm, his admiration genuine. Your supply chain overhaul saved us millions. You've set a new standard. I'd walked out of that meeting with my head held high, finally silencing the whispers about being too young, too ambitious, too much. Fast forward to now, I'm standing in the same office, but this time, Tom isn't alone. Helen sits beside him, her diamond wedding ring glittering in the morning light. It's the same ring she flashed around at their Vegas wedding last weekend, where my husband Mark and I were barely considered afterthoughts, shoved into the second row. Alexandra, darling, Helen begins, her syrupy tone barely masking the steel beneath it. It's the same tone she uses at family dinners to disguise her insults as advice. Tom and I have been discussing some organizational updates. My stomach knots, but I maintain a steady expression. Helen's been dropping hints for months, ever since she started dating Tom, about modernizing the company. I just didn't realize her vision of modernization would bulldoze my career. We're bringing in fresh perspectives, Tom says, though his eyes don't quite meet mine. He looks diminished, like a man who's seated the driver's seat. Helen has some incredible ideas for the company's future. Before I can respond, the door opens. My sister-in-law Melissa strides in, her designer suit still sporting the tags at her wrist. She's been chronically unemployed since dropping out of her MBA program 2 years ago, spending her time building a lackluster lifestyle blog. Melissa will be joining as co-vice president of operations, Helen declares, smiling at her daughter as though she's just crowned her royalty. We thought it best for her to work closely with you before transitioning to full leadership. Co-vice president. The words are out before I can stop them. Somehow, my voice stays even, masking the turmoil beneath. It's more of a mentorship, Melissa chimes in, plopping into the chair beside me as if it's always been hers. Mom, sorry Helen. Thinks I should shadow you for a while before fully taking over. You've done such a great job laying the groundwork. Taking over completely. The phrase lands like a punch. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, missed holidays, and endless proving of myself. Being handed over to someone whose resume is as empty as her blog's comment section. After all, we're family, Helen cuts in with a pointed smile. And family helps family, don't they? I've heard that phrase too many times before. Like when Helen borrowed my house for Melissa's failed jewelry business launch and left me with wine-stained carpets. Or when she suggested I hand over my handbag because Melissa needed it for interviews she never went to. I take a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. When does this transition begin? Today. Melissa chirps, pulling out a rose gold laptop like she's about to revolutionize corporate strategy. I already have ideas. The supply chain stuff is so boring. We should focus on social media. Maybe start a company TikTok. Tom flinches slightly, but Helen's hand on his arm silences him. We're counting on you to help Melissa acclimate, she says, her tone making it clear this isn't a request. I rise, smoothing my skirt. If you'll excuse me, I have a supplier meeting in 5 minutes. Perfect. Melissa springs up, trailing me out of the office. I'll come with you. Shadowing starts now. As we walk down the hall, her voice droning on about hashtags and influencers, I catch my reflection in the glass walls. Polished, professional, resilient, the woman I worked so hard to become. But behind me, Helen's smug satisfaction gleams like a victory flag. They think I'll just roll over. They think I'll let them take everything I've built. They have no idea who they're dealing with. The supplier meeting was a disaster. I sat silently, my jaw clenched as Melissa derailed our largest vendor's presentation with questions about their social media aesthetic and whether they considered doing unboxing videos. Mr. Chen, our most reliable supplier and a partner I'd worked with for 3 years to streamline our Asian manufacturing operations, kept throwing me uneasy glances. Perhaps we should return to the key 3 projections, I interjected, trying to salvage the meeting, but Melissa cut me off. Actually, I have a great idea, she chirped, twirling a strand of hair. Why don't we ditch all these big suppliers and move production to those cute little artisans I follow on Instagram? Think of the content. After the meeting, Mr. Chen pulled me aside. Ms. Chen, he said quietly, his face clouded with concern. Is everything all right? These changes seem unusual. I forced a smile, swallowing my frustration. Just a temporary adjustment. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Back in my office, now a shared space thanks to Melissa, I found her perched at the conference table, which was now decorated with a massive rose gold Boss Babe sign. I resisted the urge to throw it out the window and instead started documenting everything. Every unprofessional comment, every botched decision, every potential policy violation. Alexandra, Melissa burst in, waving her phone excitedly. Mom just texted, "We're having a special executive dinner tonight at La Maison. Tom's announcing my promotion to the board." My stomach dropped. Promotion? You've been here for 1 day. Well, yeah, she said, as though it were obvious. But Mom says I'm ready for more responsibility. This operations stuff is super basic anyway. Anyone could do it. I thought of the years I'd spent getting my MBA while working full-time, the sleepless nights spent fine-tuning supply chain models, and the painstaking relationships I'd built with our suppliers. That evening, I walked into La Maison to find the executive team gathered around Helen, who sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. Tom was beside her, his discomfort visible in the tight set of his jaw. "Alexandra, darling," Helen called out, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were just talking about Melissa's brilliant idea to restructure our supply chain. Isn't she remarkable?" I kept my tone even. Restructure? I wasn't aware of any plans to restructure. "Oh, don't worry about it," Melissa said breezily, waving a hand. "I've got it all figured out. We'll cancel those boring overseas contracts and work with local influencers instead. Imagine the Instagram engagement. Those contracts account for millions in inventory and binding legal obligations," pointed out. "Breaking them could bankrupt the company." Helen's smile tightened. "Now, Alexandra, don't be difficult. Melissa's ideas are fresh and forward-thinking. Sometimes the old ways need to change." I noticed a few board members exchanging worried glances. At least not everyone had been fully won over by Helen's charm offensive. Later that night, I found an email from David, our CFO. "Can we meet privately? Concerns about recent developments." The next morning, I met David in the corporate gym, one of the few places I knew Helen and Melissa would never set foot. "This is bad, Alex," he said, wiping sweat from his brow between sets. "Helen's already pushed through changes without board approval. Melissa's overseeing 3 major accounts, and today's trading numbers look troubling." I showed him my growing stack of documentation. "This isn't just about me anymore. They're jeopardizing the company's future." "Keep gathering evidence," David advised. "But watch your back." Sarah from legal tried to push back on the contract violations. She was fired this morning. Back in my office, I heard Melissa on a conference call with our biggest client. "Oh no, we're completely changing direction," she said, her voice oozing confidence. "Alexandra's outdated strategies are out. We're going for a younger, millennial-friendly vibe now." I froze as I watched our stock price drop 3% in real time. When I tried to intervene, Helen appeared, as though summoned by my frustration. "Alexandra, dear," she said, her voice steely beneath her smile. "Melissa needs room to grow. Why don't you take a few days off? Paid vacation, of course. Moments later, security was escorting me out. Apparently, Helen's idea of a vacation also involved revoking my building access. As I sat in my car staring at my cracked phone screen, a message from Mark popped up. Mom says you're causing problems at work. Why can't you just support Melissa? I gripped the phone so tightly it cracked further. Fine. They wanted me out of the way. They thought I'd just roll over and let them destroy everything I built. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I had 3 days to save my company, and I knew exactly where to start. From my home office, I launched my counterattack. First, I emailed the board members every piece of documentation I collected, screenshots of Melissa's disastrous client calls, charts showing the stock price plummeting, and projections of the catastrophic losses her decisions would cause. Then I called Mr. Chen. The rumors are true, I confirmed. They're planning to break our contracts. But I have a proposition for you. The next day, while I was supposedly on vacation, Mr. Chen exercised his right as our largest supplier to request an emergency board meeting. Helen couldn't block it. I was in the room, but David kept me updated via text. Chen is showing them everything. Projected losses from broken contracts, $50 million. Stock price down 7% since Melissa started. 3 major clients threatening to leave. A few minutes later, Helen trying to dismiss concerns. Board not buying it. Tom finally speaking up. Then, emergency executive session called. Get ready. My phone rang. It was Tom. Alexandra. He sounded older, more tired than I ever heard him. Can you come in? Now? I smiled despite myself. I thought I was on vacation. Security will let you up, he said quietly. Please hurry. Walking into the boardroom felt like stepping into a battlefield after the dust had settled. Helen's face was flushed with rage, Melissa was sobbing, and the board members sat stone-faced around the table. How dare you go behind our backs? Helen spat as soon as she saw me. But Tom raised his hand, cutting her off. Enough, Helen. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard in years. The board has voted. Your position as president is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do this, Helen shrieked. I'm your wife. And I was a fool to let that cloud my judgment, Tom said evenly. Then he turned to me. Alexandra, the board would like to reinstate you as vice president of operations, with additional oversight of strategic planning. That is, if you're willing. Before I could respond, Melissa leaped to her feet. This isn't fair. I had plans. I was going to make us viral on TikTok. Your plans nearly destroyed this company, one board member snapped. We've lost millions in market value in just 3 days. But I'm family, Melissa wailed. No, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the tension. You're not. Family doesn't try to destroy what others have built. Family doesn't use relationships as weapons. And family certainly doesn't value social media clout over people's livelihoods. I turned back to Tom. I'll accept the position on 2 conditions. First, a full audit of all decisions made during Helen's tenure as president. Second, a new nepotism policy to ensure this never happens again. Agreed, Tom said without hesitation. Then he looked at Helen. And Helen, we need to discuss our personal situation as well. As security escorted Helen and Melissa out, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. Alex, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Mom was doing. Can we talk? I didn't reply, not yet. Later that evening, I sat in my restored office, reading the company-wide email announcing the leadership changes. My name was listed, along with my new title. But this wasn't about titles anymore. It was about standing up to those who thought they could bulldoze their way through my hard work, who mistook nepotism for loyalty. A message popped up from Mr. Chen. Glad to have you back, Ms. Chen. Let's discuss that expansion plan you proposed last month. I looked out the window at the city skyline, reflecting on everything that had happened. About power, family, and the true meaning of loyalty. Helen and Melissa had tried to weaponize family ties against me, but they'd forgotten something crucial. Real success isn't inherited, manipulated, or stolen. It's earned. The stock rebounded the next day, jumping 10% on news of the leadership changes. I had my team back, my position back, and most importantly, my dignity. As for Helen and Melissa, last I heard, they were planning to start a mother-daughter influencer account. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just succeeding, It's succeeding so spectacularly that those who tried to tear you down are forced to watch from the sidelines powerless. The next time someone tells me, family helps family, I'll remember this. Real family lifts each other up. They don't tear each other down. And sometimes the most professional response to unprofessional behavior is simply being better than they ever thought you could be. Hi, I'm Emily Parker, and last Tuesday, I found my entire life packed into boxes sitting on my front porch. It's only temporary, my mother-in-law, Margaret, had said, her tone dripping with condescension. Sarah needs a proper home for the baby. But I knew better. This was no temporary arrangement. The boxes were stacked neatly, each one labeled with Margaret's meticulous handwriting. Kitchen, clothes, personal items. 5 years of memories reduced to categories and set outside like yesterday's trash. My hand trembled as I reached for my favorite coffee mug, poorly wrapped in crumpled newspaper. Emily, don't make this harder than it has to be, Margaret said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Her arms were crossed, her expression firm. Behind her stood Sarah, my sister-in-law, with one hand resting on her barely there baby bump and the other tucked protectively over her chest. Her wide, innocent eyes held the practiced look of someone who always got her way. This is my house, I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. Daniel and I bought it together. We built this life together. Memories of painting walls, assembling furniture, and dreaming about our future flooded my mind. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin, tight smile. Sarah's pregnancy is high risk, she explained as if I hadn't already heard it 100 times. She needs to be near family, and this house is ideal for her. Single story, spacious, close to the hospital. You and Daniel can manage in the rental property for a little while. The rental property? I asked, my voice rising. You mean that dilapidated duplex across town? Margaret had spent years lamenting how much of a money pit it was. It's been fixed up, Sarah chimed in, her voice sticky sweet. Mom's had contractors there all week. It's cozy. Cozy. The word hit like a slap. I could barely contain my disbelief. 3 months ago, when Sarah had announced her pregnancy at a family dinner, Margaret's eyes lit up like it was the second coming. Since then, she used every excuse to center the world around Sarah and her unborn child. Where's Daniel? I demanded, peering past them into the house. My house, where movers bustled about, carrying in Sarah's furniture. Through the open door, I saw the coral nursery set she'd been gushing over just last week being hauled upstairs. He's at work, Margaret replied smoothly, not meeting my eyes. He agrees this is for the best. Sarah's condition. Stop, I cut in, my patience wearing thin. Sarah's condition is a normal pregnancy. I'm a labor and delivery nurse, Margaret. I know what high risk looks like. Sarah's face clouded briefly before she burst into tears, right on cue. Margaret immediately wrapped her arms around her. Emily, she hissed. Do you see what you've done? The doctor said she can't handle stress like this. I pulled out my phone, dialing Daniel's number. Straight to voicemail. Twice. 3 times. Margaret crossed her arms again, her smile growing smug. He's in meetings all day, she said. Emily, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's only for a few months. But I wasn't naive. This wasn't temporary. The way Sarah was directing the movers, the pristine designer nursery being assembled upstairs, it was all too deliberate. This had been planned, likely for weeks, while I worked back-to-back hospital shifts. I'll call a lawyer, I said, the words spilling out before I could think twice. Margaret's laugh was sharp and cold. And who will you hire? Stanley Adams? The Parker family lawyer for 30 years? Or someone else in town who knows better than to cross us? She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a hiss. You're out of your league, Emily. Accept this gracefully or make it worse for yourself. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mom explained everything. It's best for the baby. The duplex is fine for now. Please don't make this difficult. For now, the words blurred as tears filled my eyes. 5 years of love, sacrifice, and loyalty reduced to a text message and a pile of boxes. The movers will take your things to the duplex, Margaret said, already turning back toward the house. The keys and address are on that box. We need you out by tonight. Sarah needs her rest. I stood frozen as they disappeared inside, Margaret's voice blending with Sarah's as they discussed furniture arrangements. Through the window, I saw Sarah running her fingers along the kitchen counters Daniel and I had scrimped and saved to install. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. But as I loaded the first box into my car, my wedding ring caught the light, and something inside me shifted. Margaret thought she'd won, but she underestimated me. I wasn't the same timid girl who married into the Parker family 5 years ago. I had my own resources, my own plans, and nothing left to lose. I glanced back at the house, now alive with workers transforming it into Sarah's new sanctuary. "Game on," I whispered under my breath, gripping the steering wheel. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The duplex was just as I expected, cramped, dingy, and reeking of mildew. Margaret's so-called fixes consisted of a slapdash paint job and mismatched furniture that looked like it had been scavenged from a garage sale. The wallpaper in the bedroom was peeling, revealing water stains underneath. I sank onto the lumpy couch, scrolling through my phone's photo gallery. Each picture felt like a gut punch. 5 years of memories in that house, now overshadowed by the image of Sarah, undoubtedly repainting my kitchen in the sage green she wouldn't stop talking about. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. "Emily, it's Helen from next door." I opened the door to see my colleague from a hospital. Her brow furrowed, concern etched across her face. "I saw you moving in," she said. "Isn't this the Parkers' infamous rental property?" I nodded, inviting her in. Before I could stop myself, the whole story spilled out. Between sobs, I recounted everything. The packed boxes, the eviction, the smug smiles. Helen's expression darkened as she listened. "Emily," she said carefully, "there's something you should know. Sarah was at the hospital yesterday for her checkup. I wasn't supposed to be near the records desk, but I overheard her talking to Dr. Martinez. She's not high risk at all. In fact, the doctor said she's having one of the easiest pregnancies she's seen in years." I froze, my hands clenching into fists. I knew it, but Daniel won't listen. He's completely under their control. Helen hesitated. "There's more. Last week, I overheard Sarah asking about property laws. Specifically, about how long someone needs to live in a house to establish it as their primary residence. The pieces snapped together like a cruel puzzle. This wasn't temporary. Margaret and Sarah weren't just trying to push me out. They were plotting to take my home. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a group text from Margaret. "Dinner at our house tonight. Mandatory family meeting to discuss the new living arrangements. Emily, please dress appropriately this time." I considered skipping it, but then I remembered the folder hidden in my office desk. The one Margaret and Sarah didn't find when they'd packed up my life. "I'll be there," I texted back. That evening, I arrived at the Parker mansion wearing my sharpest black dress and a cold, unyielding smile. Through the window, I saw Sarah curled up in my favorite armchair, the one I brought from my parents' house. Now it sat smugly in Margaret's pristine living room. "Emily, so good of you to join us," Margaret said as she opened the door, her eyes narrowing at my outfit. Inside, Daniel sat stiffly beside Sarah, who was dramatically cradling her barely visible bump. "The duplex is cozy," I said lightly, echoing Sarah's earlier jab. "Though I did have an interesting chat with a housing inspector today." Margaret stiffened. "Housing inspector?" "Yes," I replied, letting the moment stretch. "They're very concerned about the black mold behind the bathroom walls. And the electrical issues. Did you know it's illegal to rent out a property in that condition?" Margaret's composure faltered, her smile freezing in place. "You called the housing authorities?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. "Actually, they called me. Turns out someone filed a complaint months ago, but it was misplaced. Until today, I pulled out my phone, displaying the email. They'll be conducting a full inspection next week." Sarah shot to her feet, her polished mask slipping. "Mom, you promised that place was fixed. I can't have my sister-in-law living in a moldy duplex. Think of how it would look to my blog followers." Ah, her blog. Sarah's carefully curated online image, the one thing she truly cared about. "Oh, don't worry," I said sweetly. "I've already shared my situation on several local community forums. The response has been overwhelming. People are so concerned about a pregnant woman forcing her brother's wife into hazardous housing." Sarah's jaw dropped and she grabbed her phone, frantically checking her follower count. "Take it down," Margaret barked. "This is a private family matter." "Like how you privately packed up my house?" I shot back. Or how you privately told the neighbors I abandoned my home out of jealousy. I stood, my voice cold and steady. By the way, I found my folder. The one from my office desk. Daniel's head snapped up. What folder? The one with the property deed, I said, locking eyes with him. The one that shows I'm the primary owner of the house. My inheritance paid for 70% of the down payment. Legally, the house is mine. The room fell silent. Margaret's face turned a mottled shade of purple, and Sarah's phone slipped from her hand. That's not possible, Margaret stammered. Daniel told us he paid for everything. Did he? I turned to my husband, my voice sharp as a knife. Tell them, Daniel. Tell them how my grandmother's money made this possible. Tell them how you promised it would always be our home. Daniel's face crumbled, his guilt written plainly across it. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. None of you did. I placed a stack of papers on the table. My lawyer, not Stanley Adams, but someone from the city, will be serving you with official papers tomorrow. I want my house back within 48 hours, or we can let a judge decide. I turned to Sarah, whose carefully constructed facade had shattered completely. And Sarah? My lawyer is very interested in your searches about residency laws. Attempted property fraud carries significant consequences. I smoothed my dress, the picture of calm. I'll see myself out. Oh, and Margaret, the housing inspector wants to speak to you about the rent you've been collecting on that duplex. Apparently, you haven't reported that income for years. As I walked to my car, the voices behind me erupted into chaos. Sarah's shrieks, Margaret's frantic demands, and Daniel's desperate attempts to explain. But I didn't look back. They thought they could erase me, replace me, cast me aside. They were wrong. The next 48 hours were a war of attrition. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Margaret sent threats wrapped in false politeness. Sarah tried her hand at tearful guilt trips, and Daniel alternated between desperate apologies and weak defenses. I ignored them all, forwarding every message to my lawyer. But on Wednesday morning, there was a knock at my door. Emily, can we talk? It was Robert, my father-in-law, looking older and more exhausted than I had ever seen. I hesitated before letting him in. Unlike Margaret, Robert had always treated me kindly, though his silence in the face of her schemes had been just as hurtful. I found these, he said, placing a folder on my coffee table. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were emails between Margaret and Sarah, dating back months. They outlined everything: the manipulation of Daniel through Sarah's pregnancy, their research into property laws, and their plan to renovate my house while I was too busy working hospital shifts to notice. I stared at the damning evidence, my voice quiet. Why are you showing me this now? Robert sighed, the weight of years of inaction pressing down on him. Because I've seen this before. Margaret did something similar to Daniel's first girlfriend in college. She decided the girl wasn't good enough and pushed her out. The poor thing transferred schools, and Daniel, he didn't stand up for her. I kept quiet then, told myself it wasn't my place. But watching them do this to you, knowing how much you've given to this family, I can't stay silent anymore. I studied the emails, my lawyer's words ringing in my ears. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case. There's more, Robert said hesitantly. The housing inspector called Margaret this morning. The duplex is in worse shape than anyone realized: structural issues, severe code violations. She's been collecting rent illegally for years. Before I could respond, another knock came at the door. This time it was Helen, looking worried. Emily, you need to see this, she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was Sarah's latest Instagram post, a tearful video ranting about toxic family members and the stress they were putting on her and her unborn child. The comments were brutal. Locals who knew the truth were calling her out, and it was clear her carefully curated image was cracking under the pressure. My phone buzzed again. It was my lawyer. Emily, they're ready to negotiate. All of them. An hour later, I sat in my lawyer's office, facing the people who had tried to erase me from my own life. Margaret's flawless composure was gone. Her shoulders slumped. Sarah's mascara was streaked down her face, and Daniel looked utterly defeated. Here are our terms, my lawyer began, his tone firm and unyielding. Emily gets the house back immediately, and all renovation costs will be reimbursed. Mrs. Parker will face the legal consequences of operating an illegal rental property. And we have ample evidence of attempted property fraud should you wish to contest any of this. You can't prove anything, Margaret snapped, but Robert's quiet voice cut through her bluster. Enough, Margaret. He placed the folder of emails on the table with finality. It's over. Sarah dissolved into sobs, real ones this time. My followers are calling me a fraud. My sponsorships are pulling out. Mom, fix this. But Margaret was staring at the emails, her face pale and drawn. Robert, how could you? How could I? He replied, his voice trembling with years of suppressed frustration. How could you? You jeopardized our son's marriage, our grandchild's future, because you couldn't bear to give up control. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse and broken. Emily, I am so sorry. I should have stood up to them. I should have protected you, our home, our marriage. I looked at him, really looked at him. Yes, you should have. We can fix this, he pleaded. Move back home, start over. But my lawyer cut in smoothly. The house will be returned to Emily's sole ownership, and given the circumstances, she's filing for divorce. The room erupted in protests, but I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. Daniel, I said calmly, you didn't just fail to protect me. You helped them hurt me. That's not something we can come back from. 6 months later, I stood in my fully restored home, finally feeling like it was truly mine again. The walls were painted in colors I loved, my grandmother's furniture was back in place, and the house felt warm and inviting, no longer tainted by their schemes. Sarah had moved out of state, her social media empire in ruins. Margaret and Robert were in marriage counseling after Robert finally found the courage to stand up to her. The illegal duplex had been renovated and turned into affordable housing through a local charity. As for Daniel, he'd sent me a letter last week. He was in therapy, finally confronting the toxic dynamics of his family. A small part of me hoped he'd find happiness, but not with me. I learned my worth, and it was far too high to ever settle for less again. The doorbell rang. Helen stood there, holding a casserole dish and grinning. Ready for your housewarming party? She asked, pulling me into a hug. I glanced around at the home I had fought so hard to reclaim. You know what? I said, smiling. I am. Sometimes losing everything teaches you exactly what you're capable of. Margaret thought she could erase me, Sarah thought she could replace me, and Daniel thought he could choose them over me. They all learned the hard way what happens when you underestimate someone's strength. Now let me ask you, have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to control your life? How did you find the strength to fight back? Share your story in the comments below. Hi, I'm Sophia Mitchell, a 28-year-old pastry chef who's built her dream bakery from scratch. Life was as sweet as my cakes, until I got engaged to Michael Thompson. That's when everything turned sour, thanks to his mother, Barbara. From the very beginning, Barbara made her presence known. Darling, you really should use less vanilla in your recipes, she said during her first visit to my bakery, as if she were some sort of expert. Customers these days prefer a more sophisticated taste. I was elbow deep in wedding cake batter at the time, trying to hold back my frustration. Her critique of my award-winning recipe was unwelcome, but I managed a polite smile. Your cakes are lovely, dear, but they lack that special Thompson family touch, she added with a condescending tilt of her head. My recipes have won 3 local baking competitions, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Oh, how cute, she said. I remember when I ran my restaurant, before I sold it, of course. What she didn't mention was that her restaurant hadn't been sold, it had been shut down. I wouldn't learn that little detail until much later. Things escalated when my best friend and business partner, Lisa, rushed into the bakery one afternoon, breathless with gossip. Sophia, you won't believe what Barbara's sister Jennifer just told me. Barbara's been telling everyone at the country club that your bakery uses box mixes. She what? I sputtered. Just ignore her. My brother Tom advised over lunch that week. But as your lawyer, and your brother, I'm telling you, there's something off about that woman. Tom wasn't wrong. Wedding planning turned into a battlefield. The reception must be at the Windsor Hotel, Barbara declared during a planning meeting. But Michael and I already chose the garden venue, I countered. The Windsor has history. Robert, tell her about the history, Barbara snapped, turning to Michael's father. Robert mumbled something incoherent into his coffee cup, looking like he wanted to disappear. The garden venue is perfect for us, Mom. Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. Then came the cake drama. I was in my kitchen, sketching the design for my dream wedding cake, when Barbara barged in with her sister Jennifer in tow. Here it is, the Thompson family cake recipe, Barbara announced, thrusting a yellowed piece of paper at me. 5 generations of brides have used it. Thank you, Barbara, but I've already designed our cake. But it's tradition, Jennifer chimed in. Every Thompson bride. I'm a professional baker, I interrupted, holding my ground. I'll be making my own wedding cake. Michael won't be pleased, Barbara said, her smile as sharp as a knife. He grew up expecting his bride to honor our traditions. He'll love it, I said firmly. He loves my baking. We'll see about that, won't we? She said, her smile never reaching her eyes. Little did I know, refusing that recipe was just the beginning. Barbara's interference soon took a darker turn, one I never could have imagined. It happened so fast. I felt her hands on my back, and then suddenly I was falling. My body twisted instinctively, trying to protect the wedding cake I was carrying. The stairs felt endless. Pain shot through my wrist like fire, and the world spun wildly around me. The emergency room was a blur of lights and questions. Michael arrived eventually, but instead of concern, his face showed something closer to annoyance. Mom says you were being careless on the stairs, he said. Careless? She pushed me, I cried. Sophia, come on. Mom wouldn't do that. Why would she? Because I wouldn't use her recipe, because I wouldn't let her control everything. You're being dramatic. It was probably just an accident. The doctor interrupted with my diagnosis: a concussion, a sprained wrist, and bruised ribs. The wedding will have to be postponed, I said, fighting back tears. And so my nightmare with Barbara Thompson continued. But this wasn't the end of her attempts to ruin my life. It was only the beginning. But Mom's already called all the guests. Do you know how this makes us look? How it makes you look? Michael's voice grated against my raw nerves as I lay in the hospital bed, bruised and battered. She's worried people will blame her, he added. They should blame her. She pushed me, Michael. He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the one being unreasonable. I think the pain meds are messing with your head. Mom would never. Get out, I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. Get out of my hospital room. Now. He hesitated, looking as though he wanted to argue, but my glare must have convinced him otherwise. As the door slammed shut behind him, Lisa appeared, her face pale but determined. Sophia, she said, holding up her phone. You need to see this. Lisa had been helping set up cameras at the wedding venue. What she'd uncovered made my blood run cold. The security footage showed everything. Barbara Thompson deliberately pushing me down the stairs. Watching the video, my heart broke, not just from the betrayal, but from what it confirmed. Michael, the man I was supposed to marry the next day, would never choose me over his mother's lies. The hospital released me the next morning, but I hadn't even made it home before Michael started blowing up my phone. You need to fix this, he demanded. Mom's devastated that you're accusing her. I'm not discussing this, I replied coldly. We're done. You can't just end things over a misunderstanding. I hung up and called my brother instead. Tom, I need your legal expertise. Already on it, he said. Lisa sent me the security footage. But Sophia, there's more you need to know. At Tom's office, he handed me a thick folder. Barbara Thompson has a history, he said grimly. 3 former employees filed complaints about physical intimidation. All were mysteriously dropped, and the health department didn't shut down her restaurant for basic violations, like she claimed. Lisa chimed in. They shut it down because a waitress was pushed down the kitchen stairs. Sound familiar? Tom clicked through his computer. And get this, your bakery's recent bad reviews? All traced back to IP addresses matching Barbara's home and country club. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, Barbara's sister. Pace meeting at your bakery. Please come. When I arrived, Jennifer paced my office, wringing her hands. You don't understand, Sophia, she began. Barbara just wants what's best for the family business. Family business? I asked, crossing my arms. Well, once you married Michael, she'd naturally take over managing your bakery. You'd be too busy with babies anyway. Jennifer froze, realizing her mistake. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say that part. My jaw dropped. She wasn't just trying to ruin me, she was planning to steal my livelihood. Not steal, Jennifer stammered. Just guide. Like she did with that lovely Vietnamese restaurant before yours. They were struggling anyway. What Vietnamese restaurant? I demanded. More digging revealed the truth. The restaurant that used to occupy my bakery's location had been systematically destroyed by Barbara. She'd ruined their reputation, then swooped in to buy the space for pennies. The next day, Lisa led me to a coffee shop where 3 women were waiting. "I'm Helen," one said. "Barbara was my mother-in-law too. For 6 months. "Margaret," said another. "She got my catering business blacklisted in 2019. "Kim," the third, added. "My family owned the Vietnamese restaurant." Story after story poured out. Barbara's pattern was clear. Target successful women-owned businesses, destroy them, then take over. "She's been doing this for years," Helen said. "But we were all too scared or ashamed to speak up." "Not anymore," I said, pulling out my phone. "I have security footage, Jennifer's confession, and now your stories. Let's stop her." Kim nodded. "Count me in." I kept all the threatening emails. "Me too," Margaret added, "and photos of the accidents at my venues." Looking around the table at these strong women, I realized something. Barbara had tried to destroy me. Instead, she created an army. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. The Maxwell Jones wedding. The coordinator began, her voice brimming with excitement. "The biggest social event of the season. We want you to cater it." "Are you sure?" I asked. I heard Barbara Thompson was handling the catering. After what happened at the country club, not a chance. Word had spread fast. The security footage of my fall leaked online, and soon former employees and business owners came forward with their own stories. Lisa burst into the kitchen one day, waving her phone. "Did you see the food critics' review?" she asked, grinning. The headline read, "Rising Phoenix Bakery, Tradition Meets Innovation." Below it was a scathing expose of Barbara's so-called traditional recipes, all stolen from the cooks she bullied. Karma came for Barbara in waves. Jennifer's social circle turned on her, disgusted by her complicity. Barbara's schemes unraveled, and her once untouchable reputation was left in ruins. And me? I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Barbara thought she could destroy me. Instead, she made me unstoppable. Michael's restaurant closed before it even opened. No suppliers were willing to work with the Thompson name. Meanwhile, the sweetest moment of poetic justice came when I catered Jennifer's daughter's high-profile wedding. "The cake is exquisite," the bride gushed. "I can't believe Aunt Barbara tried to stop me from hiring you." "Your aunt isn't causing trouble about being uninvited, is she?" I asked. "Please," he said, rolling her eyes. "After what she did to you and those other women, she's lucky we still acknowledge her at Christmas." Word on the grapevine was that Michael was now working late shifts at a diner. The Thompson family money dried up after Barbara's victims filed lawsuits against her. Last week, I opened my second bakery location, complete with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that made the local news. When a reporter asked me about Barbara, I simply smiled. "I'm focused on the future," I said. "Some people build themselves up by tearing others down. I build myself up by building amazing cakes." As I was cleaning up after the event, my phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. "Barbara just got denied membership at her 4th country club this month." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Success is the best revenge, and my success was written in buttercream, validated by awards, and measured in the lines of customers waiting for my innovative takes on traditional recipes. They say living well is the best revenge, but living well while your enemies watch their empire crumble. That's even better. What would you do if your mother-in-law pushed you down the stairs and your fiancé chose to defend her? Would you expose toxic family members, even if it meant destroying their reputation? Or would you quietly walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you'd handle a situation like this. If you enjoyed this story of standing up to toxic family dynamics and serving a dish of well-deserved justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me share more real-life tales of resilience and empowerment.